Welcome to another episode of On This Day on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for On This Day, Mike Goodpaster, and today we're going to talk about January the 25th, 1972, which was 48 years ago today and perhaps the nastiest night in Minnesota sports history, as one of the state's great all-time athletes, Baseball Hall of Famer Dave Winfield, went unpunished for throwing punches in a brawl-turned-riot that erupted near the end of the Gophers' Ohio State basketball game at Williams Arena. Now, it's really lucky for Winfield that nobody had a cell phone camera in 1972. With 36 seconds left and the Buckeyes leading 50-44, Gopher Clyde Turner was ejected for a flagrant foul that left Ohio State 7-foot center Luke Whitty sprawled on the raised floor. The Gophers' Corky Taylor had offered a hand to help Whitty up when he suddenly kneed Whitty in the groin. In 95 seconds of mayhem that followed, Gophers' Ron Began and Winfield darted off the bench. Behagen, who had fouled out, stomped on Whitty's head. Fans came out of the stands, and Winfield joined the chaos. Gophers reserve Dave Winfield got in some real punches, sports writer Dick Gordon wrote in the next day's Minneapolis Star. Sports Illustrated reported that Winfield leaped on top of Ohio State's Mark Wagger when he was down and hit him 5 times with his right fist on the face and forehead. Another writer seated at the stage-like floor, Minnesota Star columnist Max Nichols, said he was a yard away from Winfield and witnessed him get in his licks, slugging an Ohio State player who was on the floor. The game was promptly waved off with approximately 36 seconds left. Whitty was removed on a stretcher, suffering from a concussion and a gashed chin that required stitches at the university hospital. 2 of his Buckeye teammates were also hospitalized. Big Ten Commissioner Wayne Duke, who was in the stands, slapped Taylor and Behagen with season-ending suspensions for what Ohio's governor called a public mugging. He wasn't the only one outraged. The Chicago Tribune called the debacle revolting beatings carried out by Gopher players and fans exhibiting crazed animal behavior. Sports Illustrated labeled the outburst an ugly, cowardly display of violence. When it was over, the magazine reported, when the police and officials had finally restored order, the fans had the audacity to boo Whitty as he was helped bleeding and semi-conscious from the floor. All of which brings us back to baseball legend Dave Winfield. He was then 20, a gifted athlete who had come of age playing baseball at an Oxford playground in St. Paul, just across the street from the Central High School, his alma mater. He was named the most valuable player at the College World Series in 1973. The San Diego Padres went on to draft him in the first round that year. He was such a terrific all-around athlete that the Minnesota Vikings and 2 professional basketball teams also drafted him. He picked baseball, spending 22 seasons on 6 teams in the major leagues. Only 16 players in baseball history ever drove in more than Winfield's 1,833 runs. In 1999, Sports Illustrated ranked Winfield number 2 behind football legend Bronco Nagurski in a list of the greatest Minnesota athletes in history. Now, with today's Gophers program kind of returning to semi-prominence, made the tournament last year, got a good shot to make it this year, it's still unbelievable to me that Winfield was left off the hook. And evidently, Winfield was not on the film, and therefore he wasn't caught. Now, curiously, and this is where it gets really bad, the university's Assembly Committee on Intercollegiate Athletics joined the Big Ten in kicking Taylor and Behagen off the team for the season while letting Winfield off scot-free. Get this. The 17-member panel included then athletic director Paul Giel and 3 students appointed at the university's by university president Malcolm Moose. One of the trio of Moose's appointed student members on the committee? Dave Winfield. According to the January 29, 1972 Minneapolis Star, Winfield was among the committee members not present when the sanctions were handed down after a secret vote that was not unanimous. Sports Illustrated asked in its story headline, "An Ugly Affair in Minneapolis," which was published 2 weeks later, why wasn't Winfield also suspended? The magazine also asked whether the late Bill Musselman, the new Gophers coach in 1972, known for being hyper-intense, helped ignite the violence. He was a philosophy professor at Ashland College in Ohio, where he was also the coach, and everybody long questioned the coach's tactics. I mean, Bill Musselman was not a good dude, and he probably wasn't somebody that should have been dealing with young adults, old adults, or just about anything. I mean, the final 36 seconds of that game were not played for fear that the Gophers and their fans would rage out of control. Now, Paul Giel, Minnesota's new athletic director, visited the Ohio State locker room, and he found Fred Taylor, the Buckeyes' legendary coach, pale and quivering with rage and indignation. And Giel said apologetically, "I knew it would be emotional, but I had no idea it would be like this." Fred Taylor answered angrily, "It was Bush. I've never seen anything like it. But what do you expect from a Bush outfit?" Now, specifically, I think Taylor was referring to the young Bill Musselman, who was Minnesota's new coach. Like I said, he had been the coach at Ashland College, and Musselman had built a reputation for showmanship, stingy defense, and winning records. It was a reputation that was not always admired by the people around him. And a professor of philosophy who followed the team there, Dr. Wayne Whitty, father of Luke, asked to comment on the brawl. And the elder Whitty said, "I'm not surprised." Whitty was a professor at Ashland when Musselman was the coach. He said that he wasn't surprised because Musselman's intent seems to be to win at any cost, and his players are brutalized and animalized to achieve that goal. Musselman inherited a sagging program in Minnesota. The Gophers had not won a Big Ten outright title since 1919. They did share one in 1937, and the student interest was low, fan attendance was terrible, and he was the fifth Minnesota coach in 5 years. Nevertheless, when the selection committee asked how long it would take to turn Minnesota into a winner, Musselman said, "We'll win right off. I don't believe in rebuilding years." He built a strong team with some JC transfers and some guys that were already there, and they instantly comprised the most intimidating team in the conference. Now, this was a predominantly African-American team that learned to play on the city playgrounds. The only question fans had at that time was how they would get along with Musselman, who was known as a strict disciplinarian. "Discipline is the most important thing in life," said Musselman. Now, the problem with that is, if you have discipline, you're probably not jumping guys and punching them and helping them up and kneeing them in the groin. Now, next to winning, of course, to help achieve what Musselman considered a winning environment, inspirational slogans were painted by an assistant coach on the walls of Minnesota's locker room in maroon and gold. Over the door to the players' shower is this message, and it is kind of the epitome of Bill Musselman's philosophy. And Musselman said, "Defeat is worse than death because you have to live with defeat." Now, the Minnesota fans loved the team. They loved Musselman, and they especially loved the Gophers' fancy pregame Globetrotters warm-up routines. By January, when the Big Ten part of the schedule opened, the team was ready, and Minnesota knocked off 4 straight foes, while Ohio State had 3 conference wins heading into this late-week showdown. Now, the tensions and emotions began to build early in the game. When the Buckeyes came on the floor, they were booed. Then came the Gophers with their Barnum and Bailey act, while their ball handling, passing skills, dribbling tricks, all done to the loud, steady beat of heavy rock music over the PA system, was entertaining. They are also designed to hype the team up and the crowd. Musselman said, "It motivates my players." In retrospect, that seems to be a gross understatement. By the end of the warm-ups, and long before the start of the game, the Gophers and the almost 18,000 fans were motivated to the point of frenzy. Later, after Musselman's so-called discipline team had come unglued, Ohio State athletic director J. Edward Weaver pointed to the warm-ups as the underlying cause of the riot. As a whole, the game was rough, nerve-wracking, but also cleanly played and well officiated. The only incident of any sort before the slaughter came when the teams were going to the dressing room at halftime. As Nix passed in front of Whitty, his left arm raised in a clenched fist salute. The Buckeyes center tried to shove the fist out of his way with an elbow, and in the attempt, clipped Nix lightly on the jaw. Later, Musselman claimed that incident incited his players. Our kids were really upset at halftime, he said. Now, with 11:41 remaining in the final period, Minnesota took a 32-30 lead on a jump shot by Taylor, replacing Behagen, who had fouled out 2 minutes earlier. But then Ohio State scored 10 straight points to go in front 40-32. Try as they might, the Gophers never could get any closer than 5 points. As defeat became more and more apparent, the crowd began to turn ugly. At one point, the officials actually stopped the game because of various debris, peanuts, snacks, pennies, Coke cups. Everything was splattering on the floor. When it was announced that any more throwing would result in a technical foul against Minnesota, there were boos and more debris. Still, the players seemed to be under control. And then it happened. With the Buckeyes leading 50-44, Whitty was driving in for what promised to be an easy layup. Instead, Minnesota's Turner cut in front of Whitty and clobbered him. Almost instantaneously, Taylor got Whitty with a sweeping overhand right hook to the ear. The crowd cheered, then booed when it was Turner who was called for a flagrant foul and ejected from the game. As Whitty rolled over and slowly got up on all fours, Taylor walked up, extended his right hand in what seemed to be a gentlemanly gesture, but when Whitty was almost to his feet, Taylor abruptly pulled him forward with his hand and drove his right knee into Whitty's groin. The big center crashed back to the floor. Then the arena erupted in a swirl of flying fists. Later, Taylor claimed, though through Musselman, that the Whitty incident triggered by Musselman spitting at Whitty. But an inspection of slow-motion films does not reveal the spitting. I think I said that wrong. Musselman claimed that Whitty had spit on his player, which caused this. The film can be seen on YouTube. There's no spitting. Now, Whitty said later, I wouldn't have done it in the first place, and even if I wanted to spit, I couldn't have because I was down too low. When Ohio State guard Dave Merchant moved in on a retreating Taylor, Jim Brewer hit Merchant with a combination of punches, and then along with Turner, chased him down the sideline. Meanwhile, Behagen rushed from his seat on the bench to where Liddy was laying helpless and viciously stomped the Ohio State player's neck and face. Fred Taylor pulled off Behagen, who, according to Taylor, screamed, "Let me go, man, let me go." Dave Winfield, who recently joined the Gopher varsity basketball team, joined the fray too. Dodging to midcourt, where some Minnesota reserves and civilians were trying to wrestle Ohio State substitute Mark Wager to the floor, Winfield leaped on top of Wager when he was down and hit him 5 times with his right fist on the face and head. When the stunned Wager managed to slip away, a fan pushed him to the floor, and another caught him on a chin. A fan caught him on a chin with a hard punch from the side. Now, as the riot increased in tempo, with fans now flooding the playing arena, only one cop was anywhere to be seen. By the time others arrived and began pulling people apart, the damage was already done. Whitty and Wager lay near each other, so dazed that neither could remember anything when questioned later. Whitty later said, I went blank after I was hit with the knee. Wager said, the next thing I knew, I was in the emergency room at the hospital. The next day, as everyone tried to sort out the facts, Ohio State's Benny Allison, a black sophomore guard, introduced the theory that it had all been mainly a case of Minnesota blacks against Ohio State whites. Allison said it was a racial thing. You will remember that Wardell Jackson and I were right out there in the middle of it, just like everybody else. Nobody swung on us. They passed us up, and they went for the other guys, the white guys. Sometimes things like that happen. It was left to Wayne Duke, as we said earlier, to fix the blame. And he swung and he missed wildly, unlike the Minnesota players of that night. The fact that Dave Winfield was not suspended also, after punching somebody laying helpless on a floor 5 times with thousands of witnesses, is just unbelievable. So, on this day, January the 25th, 1972, we had probably the darkest day in Minnesota sports history and one of the darkest days in Big Ten basketball history with the Ohio State-Minnesota brawl. All right, guys, you've been listening to On This Day on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Make sure you follow us at Grueling Truth. You can hear us anywhere podcasts are, including YouTube, iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify. Wherever you want to look, you'll find the grueling truth. So for now, this has been Mike Goodpaster, and you've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.